There we go. 5:30, calling to order the special joint meeting of the Fire Safety Advisory Committee and the Nevada City Planning Commission. It's an auspicious occasion. So if we could have, however you're going to handle the roll calls, Evan? Donna, how are you going to do that?
I'm going to call everybody's names.
That's how it works.
Crazy.
Councilmember Peterson.
Here.
Councilmember Doug Fleming is not with us this evening. Staff liaison Evan McLenathan.
Here.
Alex Keeble-Toll. Here. Theo Fatimides.
Here.
Teddies.
Yeah.
Gary Rose.
Present.
Eli
Innenberger.
Here this evening. Peter Korber.
Oh, is Peter not here either?
Not here yet. Commissioner
embarrassed.
Simmons.
Here.
Commissioner Nye.
Here.
Commissioner Halimi.
Here.
Vice Chair Copton. Here. And Chair Brown.
Here.
Would you pass this to Planning Commissioner Nye, just because I got to hear his voice as he reads this? Because he has the voice, you know. He does.
We acknowledge that the Nisenan people are still here among us today, though nearly invisible. We understand that we are on Nisenan land that was never ceded, and the original tribal families have yet to recover from the near genocide of their people. As a resident or visitor in the Nisenan land, we support the Nevada City Rancheria Nisenan tribe in efforts to stabilize their people, as well as their campaign to restore federal recognition.
Thank you, Tom. Let's see. Well, Amy, I'll give you the opportunity to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, if you would.
I'd prefer not to.
Okay. Let's see. Carrie, would you like to do that?
I would prefer not to.
I'll do it.
I'll stand.
Thank you, Alex.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Wow. Got through that. Okay. So, Evan, you want to run us through an agenda? You wrote an agenda.
Yes, but after you take public comment on items not on the agenda.
We're going to take public comments on items not on the agenda. According to, let me get this right, Public Comment Code Section 54954.3 provides any member of the public may address the committee on any matter not on the agenda that is within the specific subject matter jurisdiction of the committee. Do we have any public comment? Seeing none. Thank you. Back to you.
Yes, so tonight's format will work with two presentations to begin with, one from Councilmember Peterson and then one from a group called Headwater Economics, specifically the Community Assistance for Wildfire Planning. And they will walk us through a little bit of their work that they've been doing with the city. At that point, we can make a decision. We can take some public comment. I would recommend taking some public comment and then coming back to the table and discussing as a group here steps forward and questions and concerns. Now I'll add, after the presentations, there will be a chance for questions for staff and Headwaters from this group.
Okay, thank you, Evan.
Absolutely.
So I'll go ahead and kick it off. Donna, if you could put up my PowerPoint presentation. So I want to talk about this in a number of ways. So I think that all of us are aware of the, we hear a lot about existential threats, but for us, fire is the top of the list. We know with the work that we've done in our community that the number one issue for our community is protection from wildfire and working on wildfire mitigation. And we have come at that in a lot of ways with the support of all of our community, with the Firewise communities that have risen up and the ones that we're continuing to form. That this is really a community effort with the passage of Measure C. But as we start to look at it, and there's so many things that we need to do, but one of the ones that has stood out for us is looking at who we are in relation to fire and our history. And I think it's a really important conversation that we need to advance as we go forward. And, it's official. One of the country's best small towns, and that was Smithsonian Magazine, top 15 small towns in the entire country. So clearly, there is something here worth preserving. We've all seen that, we've all known that. This guy here, go back. Nevada City's future is in the preservation of its past. This is Bob Payne from around 1968 or 1969, who was a planning commissioner and apparently used to have that plaque hanging in City Hall. And I don't think any of us disagree with that, how important the preservation of our architecture, of not the way of life necessarily, but what we have in Nevada City and what's been built and what has been here for so long has become what attracts people to Nevada City. I've been around for a while in local government, and the last kind of economy or last kind of financial tools I would like to run a city on is tourism, because it's so uneven and everything else, but that's what we do here. Over 60% of our general fund budget comes from tourism related. So the preservation is really important. It's also really important to our identity and who we are, and for a lot of folks, it's why we're here. On a personal note, I just want to say that one of the reasons why this has become so important to me personally is I got elected in 2020 because I wanted to ensure a viable future for Nevada City. And in 2020, and not a lot of you saw this, but if you saw into local government at that time, and I know you saw some of that, it wasn't working so well. And we took 5 years as a council to rebuild the entire administrative structure of this organization so that it reflected the concerns, issues, wants, desires of our community. For me, I have never lost sight of getting elected to ensure a viable future for our community. So a couple of years ago, when Daniela Fernandez, the mayor, said, I want you to do fire, I said, okay, I'll do fire. Actually, I said, I don't want to do fire. I did 10 seasons of fire when I was a kid. I had enough fire to last me a lifetime. But she said, it's like, we need to really get serious about this and take this on. And we've had folks that were working on that before with the Fire Safety Advisory Committee. But when we got the new city manager around, I think about 2022, 2023, we did a strategic plan for the city, and fire prevention became the #1 issue. When we then formed council-supported committees around that to elevate the importance of that, it began to change, and we began to do a lot of work to support that. But we do believe, and I personally believe, that this is really true, that preservation of our history and of our buildings, our artifacts, it defines who we are as Nevada City. So, but we need to think about that, I think, in a broader sense. So one of the first things that happened, when I got on the Fire Safety Advisory Committee, and through the help of Theo, we had Jana Volanovic, did I get it right? Valakovic from UC Davis Extension, who heads up their wildfire protection program at the UC Davis Extension, came to town and did a walkthrough with us. It was eye-opening. We looked at a lot of neighborhoods and we looked at a lot of houses, but these are the pictures, and these are Lou Cici's pictures that he took during that, as these were pointed out to us. And what we saw in a lot of ways was we know that wildfire and the real threat is embers and how they move and how they collect and how they distribute heat. And we saw on the upper left, we saw shingles against peeling paint and wood that is just, were there an ember storm, It's gone. That building is gone. The one next to it is a little bit better because there's metal roofing, but still were the embers to stack against, they would be stacking against wood. At the lower left, we have, we used to be the South Pine Cafe and then the Place, but it's still covered in cedar shingles. And cedar shingle may as well be covered in newspaper when it comes to fire and flammability and the embers. And then the New York Hotel and all the lovely balconies that we have in town that are perfect for collecting embers and depending on what those embers land on. And we know that there's ways to work with this, and we know that, you know, the last thing that we could do is just like, okay, we're going to change everything and everybody's going to retrofit everything. And nobody has the money for that. Nobody has the ability to do that. But really, this is the beginning of a conversation. If preservation really matters, what are we preserving it from? And if we don't preserve it from fire, we have nothing to preserve it from. And this is a lot of my perspective, but we've learned this on the Fire Safety Advisory Committee, where we do a lot of learning. Because the consequences of not doing this are, there's Chinese camp, that was this year when they lost the old Chinese encampment down in outside of Modesto, fire. The next one is Lahaina in August, and these are old historic towns that are virtually gone. And then Greenville, and I talked to somebody that just revisited Greenville as they're starting to try and rebuild it. It's north of us. This was the Dixie Fire. And the fire burned so hot that it burned the mortar out of the rocks between the foundations collapsed, and they are absolutely at ground zero on these buildings and trying to rebuild them. And how do you start, and what do you recover, and what does it look like? And I think we know, and we're learning that you know, there's so much that you can do, but anything you can do that slows it, that changes the spread of fire, and in a downtown like ours, it's one thing to protect the downtown, but when you have an area of town that is so unprotected, you also have to protect the rest of the town from that part of town if it burns. And then we had, of course, Paradise. And so I was talking to somebody from a neighboring city today who told me that, you know, you really can't talk about these events like this because these were all wind-driven fires, and there's nothing that you can do with a wind-driven fire. Okay, maybe true. I mean, we saw that in Southern California and Los Angeles this year, 100-mile-an-hour winds. There's nothing you're going to do with that. But there's also, these fires all start small and get bigger. And they may have wind behind them, but anything that you can do that slows it down, anything you can do that prevents it from just going up in flames because it's just a tinderbox, gives you an opportunity to take that fire on in a way that might make a difference. It's incremental, and when we talk about this going forward, we really need to understand this as an incremental effort. This is not something that we could fix overnight, but we're seeing a lot of advancement in materials and a lot of opportunities for looking at this different, but some of our ordinances actually prohibit us from using materials that could fire harden some of our buildings. And I think we need to get real thoughtful about that and think about that, because a couple things we know is that you can extinguish fire with fire. It's not entirely true if you've been on a fire line and backfired or something, but mostly you can't. Mostly it's about getting ahead of it and prevention. And, you know, the reason that we have the programs that we have in Nevada City, the reason that we can have the conversations that we're having, the reason why the Fire Safety Advisory Committee was responsible for advancing one of the most advanced and restrictive landscaping ordinances in the state, is because we could build our own programs that said we need to look at ourselves and see what we need to do. And through that, building out these programs and working with the folks, we've been able to partner with the county, who has just been an enormous supporter of our work and helping us advance this, recognizing what we're trying to do. Because in the end, it's, challenging the status quo takes commitment, courage, and above all, a dedication to learning. Marshall Gans, the guy that said that, was one of the key attorneys for the farm labor movement in Salinas. And they worked so hard understanding that changing the status quo, and this is what we're looking at. We have a belief, there's a belief that exists in our community that nothing can change in certain places, which is, in my opinion, a denial of reality. Because there is no status quo, things are always changing, they're getting better, they're getting worse, they're always in movement. And the idea that you can hold something static and keep it the same is really a falsehood of our own thinking, because it's going to change. And when it comes to changing, and as I said, we do care about, we get this at the council all the time, that we don't care about the historic nature of our community and the fear because of all the threats to development that have existed over the years, and how the historic district was built out of the fear of development, which was legitimate, that Freeway had just gone in. But these things have changed. Nobody's after a wholesale change of any kind in the historic district. I haven't found anybody that is. Certainly I think I could speak for the council, because we say that all the time. We're not interested in changing our downtown. Why would we do that? Why would we change this district? It's who we are and what matters. On the other hand, protecting public health and safety is the job of local government. And looking at this, I think we really have some work to do. The other thing is, no ordinance is sacred. I just want to say that, and I'm not being cavalier when I say that if you want to change an ordinance, give me 3 votes and 30 days. We can change an ordinance. That's how it works. And as I said, we have no interest in doing it wholesale. We have no interest in doing it without engaging our community. This is what we do in Nevada City. So I wanted to put those things out there. I wanted to frame the issues for us, the thinking. There's no simple answers. I think we're going to hear some interesting stuff from Headwaters Economics, who have been great partners in helping us understand this and helping us understand that we're not the only community out there that's facing this.
Great. And with that, I will introduce Ryan Handy, who will present on behalf of their group and share some background about their organization and what they've seen as they've kind of worked with staff, looked through our ordinances, looked through everything we have going on in the wildfire prevention realm, and what rose as kind of the top priorities through their eyes. So with that, Ryan, go ahead.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for having me here. I'm Ryan Handy with Headwaters Economics. Before I launch into my presentation, I just want to thank you all for a fabulous introduction to the issue and setting the stage. And I also really want to commend you all for, in our view, being really kind of ahead of the curve on this issue. A lot of communities know that this is a concern, how to preserve historic buildings in the face of wildfire, but not a lot of communities are having the conversation that you all are having tonight. And in some ways, you are ahead of the federal government on this and also in line with them, which I'll get more into in a minute. Okay, so with that, I'm going to share my screen and set up this presentation. Just give me a moment. Okay, are you all seeing the presentation?
We are.
Yep.
Great. Okay, as I said, you all really set the stage great for us. And really, your conversations in Nevada City were really inspiring for us. When Evan first approached us about helping you all think about historic preservation and wildfire, it really inspired the research that we did that is included in your packet tonight. So just a quick intro, who we are. I'm obviously Ryan Handy. I am the co-program manager of Headwaters Economics Community Planning Assistance for Wildfire program. I'll explain more about the program in a bit. I'm also joined tonight by my colleague Doug Green, who is a career, now retired structure firefighter and a land use planner who is also a co-manager of the program with me. And then Susie Riggs, who is a planner based in Montana here with me, who has an extensive background in consulting with nonprofits, architecture firms, also as a public sector planner who did a lot of historic preservation work. This presentation, I'll just be talking. I'm hopefully going to wrap it up pretty quickly. And then Doug, Susie, and I are all here, and our main goal is to have a conversation with you all. So first, just the requisite Headwaters economics information. We are a nonprofit based in Montana. We have offices in Bozeman and Helena. We run community assistance programs for flood and fire risk reduction. We're also a research specifically around economic shop, and we also do a lot of data analysis and tools analysis. We work very closely with the federal government, specifically the U.S. Forest Service, to do wildfire risk mapping. And the program that we all represent is Community Plan Assistance for Wildfire, or CPAW for short. CPAW offers free technical assistance to communities in the United States. We have worked in really, it's more like 100 and counting communities now. Also, Hawaii is not on this map, and we've been working with Hawaii super closely after the fires in Maui. We have worked on the East Coast, in the Southeast, the Midwest, and of course, lots in California and the West. CPAW is primarily funded by the U.S. Forest Service and some philanthropic dollars, but it's intended to be free for communities like you. So CPAW, when we work with communities like Nevada City, we have a few outputs that we give you. We primarily do land use planning, code rewriting, wild and urban interface codes, different things like that. We also can produce different research, like the historic preservation research post that was in your packet. We also do a lot of communications around wildfire. We really help communities learn how to talk about wildfire risk and how to reduce it. And then the main goal, obviously, of all of this is to add to your capacity. We know communities like yours are busy and typically don't have a large staff, and so our goal is to help you achieve your goals. So just a quick roadmap of what I'm going to talk about tonight. First, I'm going to talk about how buildings burn in wildfires, and Gary addressed this a lot when he addressed embers, but I'm going to just give you a little talk through of why that is so important when we think about historic structures. And then I'm going to talk about where the federal government comes in to regulating historic preservation and how their thinking has shifted to take into account climate hazards like flooding, but also wildfire. And then I'm going to wrap up with highlighting some opportunities for Nevada City that hopefully can guide our conversation. Okay, so to get into why historic buildings are, I think, particularly at risk when it comes to how buildings burn down. So there are really three ways that homes burn down in a wildfire. The first one is, what we most people think of classically is flames coming right up to a home and burning it. And think of this, it's sort of like when you ham-handedly stick your marshmallow in the fire and you singe it instead of roasting it beautifully. That's kind of what we're talking about when we talk about flame contact. Another way that homes can burn down is called radiation. So they're next to a structure that has a lot of heat, and it radiates heat onto the next structure. This is really like, when you would have a marshmallow that you put into the fire and it gets beautifully toasted from the radiant heat of the fire. So the final way, and the most common way for homes to burn down is through embers, which are basically like little sparks that fires throw up into the air. Embers can fly for miles ahead of the actual flame front, and they also, we know from research and science, they're responsible for 90% of all home loss. Embers can be, as big as your hand, but they also can be really tiny. This is a picture of an ember storm during a fire in Washington about 10 years ago. So you can see all these little tiny embers are really good at getting into the soffits and the crevices of our homes and igniting them. And they can land really anywhere. On the roof, on the deck, they can go under your wall, you name it. So the main thing about embers that's particularly devastating, again, as I said, they travel really far. So this is a picture of the after effects of that ember storm we just looked at. You can see there was a fire 2 miles away from the homes that burned. And not every tree in this area has survived, but quite a few have. So this explains, when we all see a home that has burned down in a wildfire but is surrounded by trees that are mostly alive, it's because embers are to blame. So this is why when we talk about wildfire risk, sometimes the maps showing wildfire risk are tricky to comprehend. Like sometimes half the street will be in a risk zone and the other half won't. What's really going on though, during an actual wildfire, embers can fly anywhere and touch any building. So a lot of research, a lot of research has been done to kind of test what we can do to protect buildings from embers. A lot of this has been led by a for-profit organization, IBHS, the Insurance Business and Health Insurance Group. I always get that acronym wrong, but they actually burn buildings down in a warehouse to test and see what is most effective. So what we're gonna watch is a really quick, 20-second video that shows how a home that does not have structure hardened, so it has a lot of wood and combustible material, burns as compared to a home that has been hardened. So a home that has non-combustible siding, no plants around it. The thing I want you to think about as you watch this is which of these homes has more in common with historic architecture in Nevada City. So they put these two buildings right in front of this machine that spits the embers. You can see on the right side of the screen the embers spitting. The embers have already caught the plants on fire on the home on the left. And and you can see the embers have also caught the house on fire. They're climbing up the wood shingles. They're burning the deck. And they're possibly also getting into the house inside now because burning it around under the door. And if you look on the right side, nothing is ignited in this hardened structure, the structure that doesn't have combustible siding. So when you mix embers with wind, this is what you get. Flames that are then fanned by a lot of gale force wind. This is what happened in LA. This is what happened in Lahaina. It's what happened in the Dixie Fire. Also what happened in the Marshall Fire in Colorado, if you're familiar with that one. So homes really are a source of fuel in and of themselves. A lot of people think of the fuel for fire as being trees, but our communities are the source, and they actually can burn each other down. Your buildings can burn each other down. So what does this look like for a historic community? You already saw some really devastating pictures of California examples. These are some to just kind of prove that this problem is really broad. When ember storms come into communities, they destroy historic architecture that is really vulnerable because it relies on a lot of wood. This is a fire in Alberta, Canada. Jasper is the gateway community for Jasper National Park. More than a fourth of the community completely burned. This was one of their really famous historic churches that Queen Elizabeth has visited. It had cedar shake roofs. As you can see, all that remains of it are stone siding following the ember storm. And another thing I think is interesting to point out, if you look at the picture of after the fire, all of the trees in the vicinity survived. So that means these buildings have these big open wooden spaces that are exposed to embers. So this, you all heard about Greenville. I think of this a lot when I think about the risk of historic buildings, particularly those made of wood, when it comes to wildfire, and that's nothing new to all of you. So now that we've talked about the risks, let's talk about how historic preservation regulations view wildfire and how we can reduce climate hazard exposure. So you are familiar with the Secretary of the Interior's standards for treatment of historic properties, which is basically the regulations that we all use and that you all use to determine what kind of interventions you can do to your historic structures to preserve their integrity and also preserve their longevity. These standards are, of course, intended to preserve and protect historic buildings Unfortunately, they don't offer any guidance of how to do this in face of wildfire. And as Gary mentioned, many of their recommendations, unfortunately, are the exact opposite of what we would normally recommend for a non-historic building to help harden it against a wildfire. Having said that, though, the federal government knows this. They know that when these standards were first drafted in the 60s, that there was an oversight. We did not consider the impacts of different climate hazards on historic architecture, such as flooding. The federal government, I spoke to the planner who authored these guidelines. Her name is Jenny Parker. She works for the Park Service. I spoke to her for the purposes of my research, and she helped put together these guidelines for flood adaptation. And she told me that she used the word oversight. They realized that when these guidelines were drawn up, no one thought that we have to do something special and different and make exceptions for buildings exposed to flooding. So if you're not familiar with these guidelines, you definitely should take a look at them. They're really interesting. They give you the sense of the scope of interventions you can have when it comes to addressing climate risk. Some of them are really minor, but some of the recommendations for flooding are really major. One quick picture on the lower right, I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but a common recommendation for historic structures in floodplains is to lift them up by a few feet, at least to base flood elevation, but in some cases, a whole story or a garage worth. So this building pictured here was raised by several feet to take its first floor out of the floodplain. So it's a pretty big intervention, but importantly, it preserves the building and its facade and its look and feel and everything else about it that makes it special so it can remain there in the community. So there are no guidelines like this for wildfire. It is the federal government's intent, though, that communities adapt their historic preservation guidelines to preserve their buildings in face of wildfire. They want us to be making exceptions that will reduce fire risk to these buildings. The problem is they don't give us any clear ways how to do it. Just a quick preview here. The federal government is aware this is a problem and they are on it, so to speak. They're planning to release a policy brief on how to adapt historic preservation guidelines for wildfire sometime in 2026. I don't know if that will definitely come to pass. Several of the staff members in that department have lost their jobs, and they're pretty understaffed right now, and it did take them a decade to author these guidelines. So the federal government is, I guess, with us on this thinking, but I don't know that communities can afford to wait. So the research that we put together then was an attempt to kind of step into the void. Communities like yours across the United States are thinking about this now. They need thoughts now, and so we wanted to put together some high-level thoughts. The research paper that we put together is intended to offer a path forward until the federal government can give us more clarity. So obviously one of our main recommendations is the federal government needs to establish clear standards for adapting buildings to wildfire risk, just as they have for flooding. In the meantime, there's lots of things communities like yours can do. One really effective intervention is landscaping, making sure that you reduce combustible or flammable material around your home. Being in California, I think you're all probably familiar with all the talk about the 0 to 5 zone. I think in California they call it zone 0. Having nothing combustible around a building. This can go a long way to protecting an historic building. You also have an option of your local codes. Although the federal government authors these standards for the protection of buildings, it is up to you how you decide to regulate your historic buildings, and there are small changes and interventions you can make to reduce the risk. And fourth, our general recommendation we offer in our research is know your values. Know what buildings you value, why you value them. And I think here in Nevada City is really far ahead. In most communities, you have really good documentation and understanding of what your values and assets are. And this is a key thing to helping preserve things and also to help you think about what ways you can preserve that value while lowering the risk. Okay, so to wrap this up, let's just talk about some potential opportunities for Nevada City that you all can discuss tonight or in the future as you're thinking about how to address this. One simple recommendation that we have for you all to think about is updating your design guidelines They're extremely thorough, very detailed. They are also pretty old at this point, and they could be updated for clarity and usability at the very least, and also be brought into compliance with state regulations and make sure that they read the same as California's risk hazard codes read. The next step would really be to think about what is the appropriate adaptation for you. We have thought through some kind of spectrum of interventions that you all could pursue, ranging from the smallest intervention to a really large intervention to voluntary to mandatory interventions. It's up to you to decide what feels right for you and how you want to preserve historic integrity. And then finally, once you have kind of chosen your path, adopting preservation guidelines that will allow you to do structure hardening on historic buildings. So I know that's a bunch of jargon, so what does it mean when we say adopting guidelines that allow you to do? Oh, that's weird, I don't see why. We might have taken that one slide out of here. I think it's missing, but I can just cover it over. And you also have in your packet the research that we produced on this, and in the packet is a matrix that takes the basic 4 interventions that are common in historic preservation and aligns them with ways that you can reduce fire risk. So ways you can reduce fire risk if you're preserving a building, restoring, rehabilitating, or reconstructing, which ranges from like the least intervention, which might be like, you know, a landscaping plan, to the highest intervention, which would be complete reconstruction. And in the case like that, you could use something that like mimics the look and the feel of wood without actually being wood. So that's all I had wanted to talk about. Just a final closer slide for Headwaters. We generate a ton of research about wildfire risk, also flood risk, if you're interested. If you don't follow our newsletter, we send them out about once a month. We also have a new podcast about wildfire risk that Doug and I host together, and we have an episode coming up about historic preservation. Won't be any news to any of you, but fun to think about. You can sign up in the newsletter here. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm happy to revisit a slide if we need to, and Doug, Susie, and I are here for questions.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the partnership that has been so important in our thinking and help and supporting us in our work. And this is a big, messy thing, and the guidance and the thinking that you've provided helps us understand and organize our thoughts around that. So it's been just really wonderful, and the work you do is really great. So thank you.
Thanks.
So first, I'll open it up. Questions, thoughts among the folks here at the table.
I would say this is a good time for specific questions for Headwaters, if you have them.
Just curious, do you have any case studies also to share of programs that have been implemented based upon your recommendations? You don't have to share those now, but I'm just curious if that might be available to review at some point.
Of historic preservation programs that have been implemented?
Yeah, anything that seems like, relevant to this conversation here today.
Unfortunately, I do not, and that's kind of how cutting edge this particular issue is. I am not aware of any community that has actively worked on adapting their historic preservation guidelines to take wildfire risk into account. There actually are several examples of new wildland-urban interface codes across the country that have been passed that exempt historic structures, so they do the opposite of what we recommend. Doug and Susie, I don't know if you have any other examples you can think of, but to my knowledge, this is the first community that we've worked with that has had this conversation.
Yeah, we're out on the edge on this one.
Pioneer spirit right there.
It is.
Doug, did I see you wanted to say something there? I saw you unmuted, but.
Yeah, I was just, I'm not sure why I am, there we go. I just wanted to kind of follow up with what Ryan said. We've worked for many, many years with a lot of communities around the country and have kind of tried to push this a little bit and recommend it, and there's a lot of pushback on it because, usually because it's a lack of understanding about what's really being asked to make these districts safer from wildfire. I think there's an illusion out there that it's going to mean a lot of the things that we value about historic buildings are going to be not allowed or changed. And with the current science that's happening, that's not the case. There's a lot of strategies that can be done to retain the character of the buildings, and site-specific strategies on those things. So we've pushed this a lot in a lot of communities. It's been rejected because of that, and so we are hoping that by working with Nevada City, we can come up with some really innovative ideas that works for both the groups that want to preserve these structures and also make sure they are safe from wildfire, because we are getting asked a lot by this right now, and we're hoping that by piloting this project here, we can kind of provide some insight for, well, there's a lot of communities that are asking for this after the fires in Lahaina, the fires in California, et cetera, the Jasper fires, and so this is a great time for us to find that bridge, that crosswalk between historic preservation and wildfire safety.
Great, and if I can add one thing for context, this is not just CPAW coming to us with this idea. This is in foundational documents that the city has been actively pursuing, including the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, which was done by a consultant, but with tons of community input and the best science that's available with the modeling. So in your staff report, you see a direct recommendation of what they state. And then in addition to that, CPAW found it, right, and kind of pinged that as a huge area of improvement. And then as well as this Fire Safety Advisory Committee in their own plan has, decided that this is something worthwhile to discuss and take action on. The only other thing I would add on top of that is we do live in a fire-dependent landscape, right? This environment typically sees fire every 20 years on a good scale, sometimes, more frequently than that. So just throwing that out there, and feel free to ask more questions of Headwaters at this time, and then we'll open it for some further discussion.
Theo, do you have something?
Yeah, thanks. This is kind of taking a step back, but I want to make sure the discussion's framed here in a way that I understand. So 90% of home loss embers, I hear that. Do you know more about how those numbers come from urban conflagrations, where you have sort of a mixture and an inability to deduce what the actual ignition cause was? Would some of those urban conflagrations, building-to-building ignitions, be put into this 90% number or not?
Doug, do you want to take that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because after these conflagrations, determining, there's both sides of this, right? Determining how those structures were burnt is hard, whether it be from embers, whether it be from radiant heat, from structure-to-structure ignitions, from flame. And so some of these numbers that we've been able to actually confirm that they came out of embers are included in that 90%. Most of that 90% number comes from fires that are not conflagrations, that we see, that we, as fire departments, we fight dozens every summer. And so what we do know is, the other thing we do know is that it's hard to also state which houses were saved because of what strategy as well in those conflagrations. So we kind of pull those things out because they're an extraordinary event, and base most of those numbers on the other 99% of the fires that are out there in communities where embers are a contributing factor.
Thanks. Yeah, I often think where we can't have the numbers, one building in a dense area is kind of the same as igniting the next building. So
Yep.
you can count the first one as the whole.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, and the goal is to try to, if we can keep those buildings from igniting through embers, then hopefully we can stop that domino effect from then going into that structure to structure where all bets are off.
Add one more thing, right? Since we are talking about different aspects of fire prevention here, you all are here tonight for one piece of that puzzle, right? As the city as a whole, as you can see in the CWPP action items, we're approaching this from all sides, but this was the one item where we really wanted to include you all in this conversation, as you are a huge piece in putting that puzzle piece together.
Thank you, Evan. Other questions?
Excuse me, jumping ahead a bit here, or jumping to the next step, I would say. So even if we go through this process, put everything together, do you have information on like funding opportunities available once we have something? I mean,
I would
a lot of our property owners have challenges even maintaining what they have today.
Right, and we are in a unique opportunity with Nevada City that we have had the local tax measure C 2024 pass, where we will have, I would almost say, ample opportunity to help, build up whatever initiatives or changes we would hope to see. That's kind of the flip side of this, right, is we do want to build up more programming to help homeowners around the home hardening front, not just in the historical downtown, obviously, but it does kind of bring it all together. But yes, there are resources that would be available to assist.
Above and beyond $100.
Correct.
But we started somewhere. We started somewhere, and it makes a difference for a lot of folks. We know we need to expand it. We know it needs to go into larger projects. And we also know that we need, the other one for us that's been really big on this committee is, how we reach the underserved in our community that can't do that work, whether financially or just physically do that work. And we're starting to make some real headway on that, working with grants with our fire crew, with our fuel mitigation crews and seniors and that sort of thing. So we're starting to get there, but we know we've got a long ways to go and to build it out. But as Evan points out, I think the really good thing, due to the wisdom of the citizens of Nevada City, we do have the resources to start to look at that. It's just trying to figure out what's the best way to go, where's the leverage, and how to go about it.
And can I actually add something to that too? I think it's valuable to think about historic preservation as being slightly different from a pure retrofit program. A retrofit program like the one you all have will require an investment because people are, at this point, it's voluntary, but at some point, they will be required to make different changes to buildings. The thing about historic preservation ordinance is that people aren't required to make changes on the city's timeline, but the city dictates what kind of changes they can make when they are ready to make them. And so the first step for historic preservation is really thinking through flexibility in your codes that allow people who want to make changes to make them. And then thinking about, okay, do people want, could they be eligible for a retrofit thing if they wanted to, swap out their cedar shake roof for a Class A roof, something like that. But a retrofit ordinance is kind of it's there to push people towards these changes. Historic preservation needs flexibility within the code first, if that makes sense.
Yeah, a lot.
And just a thought, and maybe Alex or Evan could comment on this, but my understanding too is if we get some new regs in place, that then we become eligible for funds based upon what the plan is. At least that's what I've seen work in the past. I don't know if that's entirely true, but that seems like a higher possibility.
To add to that, that bridges well into a thought that I'm having, which is something that we run into a lot on the Planning Commission, especially in historic downtown, is the conflict between the desire for fire hardening and historic preservation as it relates to landmark status or various kinds of funding and certifications that we benefit from as a town. Is there anything that you could say to us in your experience or knowledge about how using something like hardy board that is meant to look like wood but is not wood might impact historic status?
That's a really great question. I do not know how I wouldn't want to speak and say how it would impact historic status. I suspect that the policy guidelines that NPS will be releasing will have some of that thinking. I will say though that the recommendations that we have made in our report, which include using materials like that, are in line with what the federal government intends to release. So I think it is their intention that those measures will not impact landmark status. And I think if you look at some of the flood guidelines, you see a similar approach where their landmark status is not impacted when you do flood adaptation. And Susie, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I can. Hi, everybody. There is right now in the preservation chapter of the Secretary of the Interior Standards a very small little box that does say you can use special exemptions and variances when the adaptive treatment from known hazards would otherwise negatively impact the historic character of the building and the site. So there is some language in there now that I think you could point to based on your risk and based on mapping. I think you could make a very strong case for doing something slightly different to improve the building's resiliency.
Yeah, and I've managed a few historic buildings, and I think about Title 14, it's Title 14, when we did the ADA compliance in historic buildings and all the exemptions that were required to maintain the historic status, but to be able to make them accessible. And there was a lot of room and a lot of latitude in there with some really significant changes with ramps and elevators and everything else that that needed to be done, and still the buildings were allowed to maintain their status, so.
That's a really great comparison. Actually, the Park Service mentioned that to me too when we were talking to them. I really encourage you all that if you haven't looked at the flood adaptation guidelines, and you will see the significance of some of those, including adding putting buildings on top of a whole nother building. It's pretty aggressive, and yet it preserves their status and their existence.
I have a pretty detailed nuts and bolts approach to historic preservation. In one of the slides, I think it's in your presentation, it shows the firehouse number 1 or 2, 1, the ones that's on Main Street. All the scroll work. I mean, you think about I don't know. That's made of wood. It looks completely combustible, and that's a lot of what our aesthetic is about, a lot of the aesthetic value of the historic downtown here. And I was a little bit crestfallen that you're not aware of how fire hardening can occur while preserving historic details like that. I noticed through the staff report, there's a lot of talk blaming wood for combustibility, and I had a couple of conversations with Theo here, who really put in my mind that embers they lodge places, and siding that doesn't have gaps under it for embers to lodge into don't just start fire right away. But so it has to do with management, sealing, preventing embers from entering a flammable area. And I'd be very interested in seeing us work on how to, in a really precise and surgical way, protect our details by bearing in mind how little things catch fire. A question? I don't know. It'd be just be.
Question in there?
Yeah, like where do we start with that? Some experimentation. I mean, we can't turn everything into cement board or metal and have a preserved town. And we also don't want to.
But if I could jump in,
Please.
I think they're not, I think what they're trying to emphasize here is it's not about aggressive retrofitting, it's about reconsidering our guidelines, because we've been through this so many times that in historic downtown, we don't like to allow for hardy board. We just had this conversation earlier this year regarding what is now the Deer Creek Bakehouse, right? And that was an opportunity where we could have allowed for a very simple building, a set of hardy board siding on all sides instead of demanding that they used wood. And that's not something that was elaborate scroll work or any kind of extra beauty. So there's a wide range of what we're dealing with here. We're not going to go and tear down Firehouse Building Number 1.
Right.
But maybe it's about taking the steps and getting in the swing of it.
Would you all mind if I shared another slide, actually from a different presentation that I have that might answer some of this question. And I think this is such a good point. I'm really glad that you brought it up. I wish I could see which of you specifically did, but you're all kind of tiny in my screen. I think the point here is that you have to think about what intervention will be the most effective. I don't think that replacing wood scrollwork with something that's cement-based is going to be most effective. You have to look at what will preserve the home, and that is just a really specific, detailed item. So again, as was just said, it's not about a wholesale replacement. It's about being smart about it. So the thing I think that might help you all think about this is we have done a lot of research for normal homes. What kind of interventions are the most effective? And the interventions that are most effective are the ones that are actually the cheapest and are the most basic. So this, I'll share it really quickly, is a slide that we share at a lot of other gatherings. It was recently actually shared with a bunch of with an insurance group in Washington State, and just basically some of the most effective risk reduction strategies are also the most affordable. As one of you just mentioned, addressing vulnerable intersections, inflammable surface areas where embers can get in, removing debris from roof and valleys and gutters, remove flammable debris from on top of or under deck area, maintaining a non-combustible zone, reducing fuels in between properties. A lot of these are not the kind of thing that you would normally regulate in a historic preservation code, but they are really approachable and basic and really effective. So I think whatever you think about for Nevada City's historic preservation, you should also consider what is effective. Susie, I also know you're unmuted. I want to make sure that you get a chance to respond too.
Yeah, I just wanted to say you can, start with some really easy things, like having specific per building plans for property owners when a wildfire is near, like moving outdoor furniture inside, making sure windows are closed, cutting back flammable landscaping. Another really easy one that I think we can all agree to is just maintenance. Best practices for both historic preservation and wildfire risk reduction include really enhanced maintenance of the building and the site. So things like ensuring siding and shingles are all present, not cracked, in good condition, cleaning behind the wood facades, removing those pine needles and those leaves during high wildfire times of the year. And then we haven't really talked about landscaping that much yet, but just having that first 5 feet be non-combustible materials. Like, these are things that I think you could do that won't impact those details, especially at the pedestrian level, that are so essential to visitors and to people who live there, walking down your downtown area.
And what I'm sharing now on the screen is a matrix that Susie helped us put together. I know it looks like it's cut off by the screen here. It's in that report in your packet, and it looks at the different types of interventions in historic preservation and suggests some of what you could do to address them. And you see some of the things Susie's talked about here. For preservation, you look at building defensible space. For rehabilitating the building, you may consider swapping out certain types of combustible materials for other ignition-resistant things. Again, this is in your packet, and you probably can get a little more detail in there.
Let me go back to Firehouse One, because Firehouse One bugs me a lot, because it hasn't been properly maintained, and that cupola is just a tinderbox waiting to go. I'm not worried about the scroll work, other than that the scroll work carries flames to those shingles that then ignite the whole building. And the maintenance has not been what it should be on that building, including the possibility of replacing it with siding, shingle siding that is flame retardant. And if you've seen those, and Charlie left, but he just did his house with new shake shingles that are composite, and you really can't tell. So what I'm not concerned about the scroll work, other than that it carries the fire into something more flammable. The scroll work's fine if what's above it is fire retardant, or fire, is more less flammable. And I think that's kind of where we need to go. The other thing that I'm thinking about, I really do think that we need to probably build out an educational program about the small things, just as we have with our homes and the amazing job that Evan and his crew have done, inspecting every parcel in this town, and finding the small things that could make a difference. And if we did that with our commercial buildings, particularly in our downtown, then we could make headway there. But the other thing I'm familiar with from my public works background around sidewalk repair and other kinds of things like that is a triggering mechanism. So if you're doing like say $25,000 worth of a remodel on one of these buildings, that it kicks in certain kinds of changes. I mean, if you're doing siding, and I know starting out, we need to be very careful and not super prescriptive, but if somebody's making a change, as you talk about the old crush, and those opportunities exist, if we had a mechanism that whether we supported that with funding and said, look, you're doing this, we can come in for this much, you come in for this much, and we can make that change. So I think there's some possibilities around that, but I do think the low-hanging pieces, I don't want to say low-hanging fruit because low-hanging trees and they catch on fire, but that what you describe as those small pieces, I mean, yeah, it's only $100, but somebody can do all the little screens on their house for that, and they could do it on a lot of these buildings. But as I showed though before, when you look at some of our buildings and those porches and the decks and stuff, that's big money, and that's a challenge.
Yeah.
I'll say something that, I mean, I look at siding, and if it hasn't been painted much, it peels, the siding bows out, there's a big crack under the siding. That's maintenance, as the presenter said, and it's expensive. But if the siding was nailed down, caulked, didn't have combustible edges available for embers to get under, that'd be a big step in the right direction. But where does the funding come from for like a Keystone house that's been very left behind in terms of maintenance, that endangers the whole neighborhood? That ought to be part of our discussion, our plan. And lots of buildings in the historic downtown are maintenance deferred.
Oh, man.
In a hazardous way.
Right, and back to my puzzle analogy, right? I would say staff in the city and this committee has been working really hard on that low-hanging fruit, and we've been doing a great effort on educating and doing all these great things. But maintenance, absolutely, you're right. If you're maintaining wood siding to its absolute prescription, the odds of an ember catching in there, igniting that siding, pretty low, right? But trying to just get people to rake some leaves out of their zone zero is really difficult to do, right? So I think we're getting almost sidetracked onto a different topic of maintenance, which absolutely is reasonable, but we still have this kind of bigger topic of these recommendations where if somebody in theory wants to do the right thing and put in hardening and do these avenues, in the code, if you read it as is, it's not permissible, really.
I want to speak in defense of the siding that went onto the former Crush building. It's treated for fire resistance. It's treated for water resistance. It holds together really well. And it.
Good. Good.
Yeah.
Which siding? The siding that they put on, or the siding that we didn't let them put on?
The siding they put on, the Advantage siding.
I thought that we told them to put on wood, didn't we?
Yes, it's
Okay.
it's a composite wood product, not composite. It's finger jointed, short pieces of wood, and then it's treated with all kinds of stuff. And one of the things it's treated for, I understand, to be fire resistant. And another thing about those wood products, I'll just say from a historic perspective, the wood ones mimic historic profiles. Like that's a Dutch lap. It's got a scoop on it in a sufficient thickness to read just like the original stuff. And ferrule cement products haven't caught up with the profiles that we really feel have a historic. The products just haven't caught up.
I just met with Tom Ivy from Grass Valley, and he has the whole Thermalite kit, which is a new wood product that looks like it looks like oak, you know, and it is composite, but it looks like wood, but it is so dense. It's, you know, it's flame retardant, water retardant, everything you just said. So I think there's a lot of technology emerging around this now, and that's one of the things that we need to keep an eye on. Let's go to Alex. Alex, we haven't heard, and then we'll go back to you, Theo. That's all right.
Sure. So, I mean, I guess I just feel like we're getting way into the weeds
Yeah.
here. And to me, it's about where do we need to do it? What do we need to do? And then the how. So, like, point number one, I think there's no purpose in getting into how it's going to be funded if we aren't actually making a decision that this is something people can do and that we're creating a mechanism for people to actually do the thing. Because you have to know that in advance of going after any type of funding, whether it's from the city or from grants, period. And what I reflect on, having grown up in Nevada City and, you know, having gone through our countywide community wildfire protection plan update, where it was identified as a high-value resource and asset that people want to see protected, is why are we trying to protect it? Like, what is our purpose in protecting Nevada City? Are we interested in protecting the historic buildings in Nevada City because we find something inherently valuable in the fact that the materials that they are made of date to the gold rush? Are we interested in protecting it because we think it is an economic asset because tourism is a driver for our community well-being? And I think we probably would benefit from getting very clear on those things, because then that drives what types of mechanisms are available to make change. Because if we are unwilling to compromise on materials because they have inherent value to us, which is totally acceptable because they are old and they have been here for a very long time, that is one conversation. And if we are interested in preserving a specific architectural vernacular or a look, then that's a whole other conversation around which types of materials might be available to us to mimic that, and which types of looks or like scroll work, there are not materials available to mimic that. Because these like really high level decision points, I think, drive how you approach it down in the weeds.
Thank you, Alex. Always. Theo?
I kind of want that to just settle, but I also want to talk, so.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for reframing it, Alex. I know you, Headwaters, think you have spoken to this about that we're not going to look at siding first, and yet it's continually what I hear about from homeowners.
True.
People also talk about their roofs first off when they already have Class A roofs. People talk about, like, should I replace all of my gutters? I'm like, well, you just clean them or put some flashing up too. And so we keep getting into the weeds of the expensive stuff. And I know that's not where you're pointing us directly first, yet this discussion here has already gone there, very specifically about siding. And I think we've also all recognized that we're not going to get there by replacing siding. That's going to come up in very specific, limited circumstances.
Case by case.
Case by case, which would be really important for the Planning Commission to work on those things, which I don't have expertise in. But to reframe this, I keep trying to find images to fuel our gut, because we see these great IBHS videos showing a really bad structure next to a really good structure that's new. And do you know of anything that compares really bad to like kind of good, where they put some flashing, maybe they raise it 6 inches up, where they have shake shingles at 8 inches with flashing, or anything like that, or where they're not using drip torches to light wood chips on fire, but they're just blowing embers at some leaves built up against you? I think the answer is no, but if you did, or if you could put some energy into it, I would just adore seeing those images.
So,
Go ahead, sorry.
go ahead.
That's a really great point. It's either the worst or the best case scenario. We do have a lot of research that talks about specific interventions that are like key to make, and also the cost of them. So you can pick like a suite of the most effective. I don't have a video like the one you're asking for that shows, you know, a moderately hardened home and its chances against an ember storm. But I have more research that talks about like the cost and effectiveness of particular interventions. So you could look at like replacing a soffit vent versus like a siding replacement or a decking or a non-compostable zone. I don't know if that addresses that question, but I am happy to give Evan some of that stuff.
I think we do have experience with that a little bit, though. We have what happened a few years ago on Broad Street, where an ancient house burned down next to a relatively newer house, and both houses had to be completely rebuilt. One was in pretty good shape and the other one was not, and I think that's a perfect example. Is that, I don't know if that's what you're looking for.
I think, I mean, that's one situation where there was a huge heat flux from a ignited structure, and I think that's going to happen no matter how much hardy plank we have, or how much hardy plank we can logically get installed with time and money and look. So I think to me, what we're dealing with is how to limit the urban conflagration so that when we have a fire response, we can go to 10 homes that are on fire from embers rather than 30, and then it's a loss of the community. That's sort of my approach of, we're going to have those radiant heat and direct flame contact losses once we have structure ignitions, I think.
I have a question for, if I may, for the panelists. There's mentioned several times of single glazed windows, and I'm wondering if I can hear an answer to how that is a fire risk.
Doug, Susie, do you want to chime in on that? I'm also happy to. Oh yeah, Doug, go ahead.
When you get the single pane window, when you have immense heat changes to that, especially when you have a fire right in the vegetation next to the structure, or adjoining or a close structure or RV or boat, the heat causes that window to then break, and that causes then once you allow intrusion into that home, whether it be flame or embers, and as most fire department people will tell you, that home then is a write-off once we have fire inside that home, especially if there's more than one structure burning. And so that's where a single pane window versus, is that answering your question? Why a single pane window is a vulnerability?
It was called out several spots in the report, and I wonder if there's a recommendation for mitigation of that, like storm windows or something like that, an additional pane added over historic. I'm talking about historic structures.
Yeah, you know, there is a lot of mitigations. Again, like was said, a lot of those can be costly. Storm shutters have been used in places where there's also high wind events. They can also protect those windows from heat. The easiest thing that, if you're not going to replace those windows due to cost or other reasons, is making sure that there's no heat source near those windows. Those windows are not going to crack from embers. They're only going to crack if there are significant BTUs close to that window. So dealing with the vegetation piece, dealing with what's stored outside those windows and around those windows is the biggest factor to keeping those windows from allowing embers and flames to the inside.
But the typical recommendation, if you do want to replace your windows, is a dual pane window, right, Doug?
Yeah. Dual pane tempered window that allows that heat flux from keeping those windows from cracking. And the other problem too is when you get that heat flux on some of those older windows, the frame also warps, and then you have the glass of the entire window falling out of that where it's located, and then allowing flames and embers to enter that structure.
I'm going to take two more. We're going to go over here, and then we'll go to go ahead.
Just thanks for this. This is really going to be very helpful, because we are going to be updating, and it's been mentioned in the design guidelines that we work with every month and at all our meetings. And then we're also working on the open space element in the city's general plan. And it's really good to have the insight that's coming from you guys on that. And also, I guess now there's a discussion of updating the ordinance for the downtown historical district, which will be involved, and so it's good to have, begin this whole discussion. Aside from that, I just sort of have a request, which is that one of the items here that's at the beginning of this report is strategic plan alignment. And, from reading over the general plan that we've been obliged to do in regards to updating the open space element, this, there is kind of a misalignment with the general plan. And like, in particular, what I'm talking about is the whole climate change element that we had to do as mandated by the state, a climate change section in the general plan. And there's a paragraph here, and I think one of the people that was just hired by the city actually wrote it, which is really good, just as discussing the impact of climate change on cities like ours. And I just thought that was something that was missing in the various reports, because these were instances of these catastrophic fires that occurred that were all, these are what people refer to as unprecedented, because they're part of the new climate change situation that we're in. So we should at least acknowledge it. I know that there's not much we can do in Nevada City to impact, but we should acknowledge it. And I think that there may be constraints upon other people in acknowledging it, that if they are working with the federal government now, that, that's maybe why there is no mention of it in these documents. But we should mention it, I think. We should always have a paragraph that starts off with it, that's the situation that we're in now. And we're not just in a regular fire situation that occurs every 20 years, or just, it's an entirely new situation, and that's why we're being obliged to make all these significant changes. So that's all.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And
Thanks, Jim.
we have a perfect spot to put it in the same grouping with strategic
We
plan.
can use the
alignment.
exact same paragraph that's in our general plan. It's really well written.
Yeah, thanks, Chip. Kurt?
Just a comment, I just want to support Alex's comment, and
Yeah,
just as
yeah.
far as because it's really easy to get into prescriptions and materials and these specific.
We're more
things we
comfortable
gotta
doing
do.
that.
Well, yeah, it's just easier to talk about. I just think one thing I'm just hoping for is just to gauge a general sense of willingness to have the conversation and sort of collaboratively building a process to just examine it. And then we'll see about, what we can do and why and where we find that. And I'm just, for me, that's to me the next logical step at a higher level view. So then we could just sort of execute against that. And obviously it's going to be an iterative, and we don't know don't know yet. But I think it's more just of having that conversation, and that's kind of what I'm most interested in.
Yeah,
I want to say that the reason I was speaking from the weeds is we seem
That's
to
what
be
you do.
we seem to be bent
You
on
did bring the
on-
planning commission.
on banning wood, and it'd be nice if we paid more attention to
From the-
details.
From the mill worker that we're banning wood.
That we pay attention to details, how buildings catch fire, what can be done to prevent flammable things from catching fire. Pay attention to that. Also pay attention to that, but refocus a little bit, maybe.
So I want to just pull this back a little bit, and thank you, Alex, for that, and I agree with Carrie. And I think it's important to understand that ultimately, we have two bodies here that advises the council. And that the council will be responsible for making a lot of these decisions. You guys make a lot of decisions, you're a commissioner, supposed to do that. We don't, we're almost purely advisory we have no policy authority, we simply advise. You guys are a little more than that, but it's still, in the end, is advisory to the council. And I think as we think about how we're going to have these conversations, that we keep that in mind. Because at the higher level, it will be the council that has to make these decisions in the face of whatever we find. But right now, I'd like to open it up to the community, see if there's any comments out there. Anybody, Lori or Bill or?
Bill, you go first.
My name is Bill Litchfield. I own a piece of property on Willow Valley Road. bravo. I think you guys are ahead of the curve, and I'm pretty impressed that you're taking this on. And I think it's a big job if you look at the downtown and the issues there with the buildings and in our community as a whole. But so I'm not completely on the point here, but I have kind of a perspective about, what do we do if we ultimately fail and we lose part of our historic towns or something like that. And so what I think the city could do that would be fairly inexpensive and easy to do would be to maybe in the sewer bills every month, tell people what it would cost them to rebuild their home or their business. Because what we see every time after these fires and disasters is people are woefully underinsured. And then you can't recover because people cannot rebuild what they have. And on some of your commercial buildings, some of my commercial building insurance policies, if you're not insured for 80% of the replacement value, you might as well not be insured. They're not going to cover you. And you're not going to get your home replaced on your home's policy if you're not insured for at least 90%. So would it be possible for the city to put a flyer in or even just print on the bills? Ladies and gentlemen, do realize it might cost, $300 a square foot to replace your home if it burns. So that people, because I find that people are years behind on what buildings cost these days. A lot of people are just insured for what their mortgage is, not what their home is worth. Yeah. And so I think it's something the city could consider to be relatively inexpensive and very helpful. It might save somebody's financial future, in fact.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you. Good job, guys.
Thanks.
Great.
In case you don't know, Bill and I are on the other side of another issue. Opposite
No.
side. In case those of you don't know that.
One of us is right.
But we're on the same. So Lori Oberholzer, 310 Nevada Street. I live in a historic house, just like just about everybody else does. And you all know that I'm a city and environmental planner. So I've worked on lots of historic preservation projects. I've worked on fuel reduction projects. And I've lived here for 40 years and, I think kind of in our heyday of historic preservation. But, I'm here tonight because I grew up in Altadena.
Yeah.
And 3 generations, in Altadena. My dad was a local sheriff in Altadena. Both of the homes that I grew up in are gone. West Altadena, almost everything is gone. It's really something, and of course, I don't feel grounded anymore. I don't feel like I have a home to go to. It's really an awful thing. So I'm all for doing whatever we can to preserve Nevada City from burning down. Some of the things that I've seen in Altadena are just, it is really hard to tell what the heck happened. My mom, the second house that we grew up in, was surrounded by, on either side, these little stucco houses that had, old tile roofs. And they really shouldn't have burned down, but they just burned down to the ground. So I don't know. I don't know what kind of fire-safe material really helps in the end with that kind of a fire. And it was all wind-driven, just as like the problems that we've had here. So I don't know. It's just hard to decide what to do. I have to say Altadena was a really special place, it still is. They have really good design guidelines, including they have a whole ordinance on not mansionizing houses and that sort of thing. And those base guidelines are helping them now because people are trying to bring back their houses the way they looked before. And I think they're getting some help from the county. It's going real slow. But anyway, that's what's happening in Altadena. So I think my basic advice here as a past planning commissioner is that every town is different, and what I'd like to see Nevada City do is tailor whatever changes we're going to make to the design guidelines and the ordinance to Nevada City's aesthetic. And I think it can totally be done. It may be that as people come in to make changes, everything can be done with the fire-safe materials. But I think it's all in the details. I mean, the Planning Commission knows this. And I think we need to get to the point where we say, you can use these new materials, but we got a list. And you got to choose from the list. You got to choose the brand that we've selected, because you can get awful-looking stuff like we had in the 50s, you know, the
Aluminum siding.
aluminum siding and vinyl siding and all that. Or you can get good hardy board that really looks real, or you could get crummy cement material that just doesn't look anything like the historic profile. Or so I think I think we will have to be draconian about that if we want to keep our Nevada City aesthetic. You know, it took a long time to write these design guidelines. I was on that committee. We had about 7-10 people on that committee. It included an architect and a couple planning commissioners and, you know, all kinds of people. It took us an entire year to write those guidelines. So it's going to take work to rewrite the guidelines, and I think we should just be willing to put that time in and not, you know, make it a quickie kind of a thing. I think we do need a committee with lots of people on it and some professionals and that sort of thing to do it. As far as details, from you know, the little things that you've been talking about, as a planning commissioner, it kind of brings things up. I do think we should start with what's most important, and everybody tells us the most important thing are the roofs. Now, downtown has
Everybody?
A lot of people tell us that I'm sorry.
I haven't heard it.
That that the roofs are the most important thing. And downtown has a lot of metal roofs. So, you know, downtown, maybe if what I'm saying is we should set our priorities. And if the roofs are the priority, maybe that's something we can really help people with monetarily, especially downtown, since, you know, half the buildings already have metal roofs. Maybe we could somehow help everybody else do the other half. Window replacements are tricky. If we start wanting to have double pane, that means everybody has to. Okay.
Ignore it, please. Please continue. What'd you do, Evan?
That was
You broke
5
it.
minutes.
I just wanted to go over a couple of these things because they are tricky. So when you have this committee working on it, I think probably we can come up with solutions to them. But same thing with the windows. I think you have to have a pile of 5 or 6 or 7 brands that are okay, that, you know, that will look like the historic windows if people are going to start replacing their windows a lot. I know there's a little city somewhere in California that actually got a grant to help them figure out how to save more old windows. Maybe we should figure out what they're doing. So I think, and I think there's a lot we can do, and I think it's all in the details, and we just need to be very careful about that. And whatever we do, I think we should just, our goal should be to make keeping it the Nevada City aesthetic. If we're going to be the first in the country, then we probably ought to try to be the very best possible example. But I think we can do it.
Thank you, Lori.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So where to next?
If we want to take a shot, right, the agenda item tonight is to discuss solutions, strategize on enhancing the resilience of Nevada City's historic downtown against wildfires, focusing on structural hardening. Some further context, right, staff hasn't really allocated too much time to this because it has not been a listed real goal of the council or planning commission. So this was that first step to see kind of that litmus test of where the planning commission is at, and if you would like to see continued efforts in creating a more formalized plan, if you don't want to do anything, if you want minor details, big details, general direction in that realm is really what we're looking for.
You're ready.
I'm ready.
Go, Rod.
So, yes, first let me say thank you. I think this is something that desperately needs to be done. I'm glad we're doing it. It would be very easy to continue to ignore this, and I think that was the old way of city doing things, but we're in the new way now, as Gary was talking about. I'm also encouraged, thank you, Lori, for speaking up. You know, I'm encouraged to hear, you know, some consensus. We might not agree on the details, but we agree that this is something we need to get done and start the process. So my next question, or maybe my request would be, to hear from you, working with our new planning staff.
There might be a capacity issue here.
It's going to be a process. We all know it's going to be a process. And I think, outlining what the steps of that process is and, a timeline for that, I realize we may not stick to that, but, having a goal is important. So, so thank you, and let's go.
Welcome, and that sounds very doable.
And let me just ask, is the design guidelines the pathway through this?
I think it's one.
It is
right?
a pathway.
A pathway, right. I think there's things in code that need to be addressed as well.
But if we're looking at, okay, honestly, you all know right now we're dealing with some capacity issues in the planning department. But if we were to take a bite of the apple at this, would it be design standards as a place to start?
I don't think so.
What do you think?
I think we should start with code and then extend to design. And the reason being that, for me personally, understanding the code is the most important aspect of understanding how it's the cake underneath the frosting, right?
Okay.
I guess it's a skeletal issue to me personally, but also I think understanding the way that the Planning Commission tends to work, we really have a tendency to spiral when it comes to questions about details, and we can really spend a lot of time talking about details, which is great. There's a lot of input and a lot of thought and thinking about it from all angles, but I think it's helpful to be anchored by something like a code. Personally, what do you think, Rod?
Other thoughts on this?
I'm not going to say yes or no to the code. I think a prior step would be to see, we have consultants who can help us identify, what the big opportunities are, whether they're in code, whether they're in guidelines. Let's address those opportunities.
Okay.
So maybe an impact focus?
Yeah, exactly. I think there's like an assessment that needs to be done. Here's your glaring items that if you change, these half dozen things, you're going to be 50% of the way there.
And I will add, CPA is already basically working on creating a matrix of the design guidelines to kind of create different pathways for appetite, basically, and effectiveness. So it pairs the effectiveness with the modification and kind of sets that tone of how far you want to take it.
Okay, good.
So that could be done very easily. I don't know what the proper mechanism is, if it should go to the Planning Commission and we discuss it there, or if we,
Okay. I know how to do it, I don't know what we're doing, but I know how to do it. I don't know what it is we're doing, but I do know how to do it. How this would work, so clearly I think that we're hearing some sort of ad hoc committee, I would think, whether it's two subcommittees here or others in the community, because this is going to be a long conversation.
Yes.
And so what is the structure that best supports that conversation? And I do like the impact idea. And I think some work has been done on the code already. Not on the code.
Not direct code, because the code itself is pretty to the point from my understanding, but it is, from how I understand it, kind of a catch-22, right? Like, you can't change one without changing the other.
Right.
So we can't just do one, we have to kind of do both.
The design guidelines is how we interpret code, because we have to interpret, that's what architectural review is, interpreting code.
So we have an entire process to
not just check
address.
boxes. That's the challenge for us. So suggestions to the suggestions for effectiveness to the design guidelines might be helpful, or maybe that's something that we iterate toward.
Well, like I said, we would be pretty well set up with CPA to meet with the Planning Commission if you all wish to agendize it and kind of start that as a starting point to see kind of what these measures might be within our current design guidelines.
It might be helpful to start with suggestions too.
Well, and that's what they are.
From your end.
Okay.
There's one more potential third aspect of this. I mean, I think there's things that aren't necessarily, that are part of like city process as well. For example, right, we go through all these tree removal reviews for things like invasive species, which we all immediately approve getting rid of. You know, trees in zone 0 that are lifting up foundations, those have to come to us. I mean, I'd like to see us get rid of those, you know, obvious stumbling blocks that just make it harder for people to do the right thing too.
That's good.
Is that a consensus, do we think? 'Cause-
Yeah.
Well, but let me just take this, I'm not, okay. I know, I have some sense of what you guys do, and some of that's really appropriate because you are looking at the issues that you have to deal with, and they're the tools that you use all the time. And you should have a whole lot of say around that. At the same time, we have the whole other fire side of this thing. So I'm wondering what the appropriate structure would be to have those jointly have those conversations. And then, and really, and if we could figure that out, and then it's elevated to the council, for the council to do the laying on of the hands to say, good idea, go forth and do this, we support it. And then we back up, knowing that we would make recommendations ultimately that would eventually come back to the council for approval, because that's how that would work. So like I said, I know how to do it, but it's just like, what would that configuration look like? That's what I'm kind of curious about. Deal.
Are any of these things we're talking about going to change 95% of the buildings in the historic district? Or are these just when you
Change
do
when?
permits? Is this just talking about?
We don't know.
Permits and building? Or could this also be standards for retrofits?
I think retrofits, it's too early to talk about retrofits.
Okay, yeah, so I have the.
Probably not.
Yeah, I have the opposite view where I'd love to see, and I don't know how it works, right? I'm coming completely, know nothing about this situation, but what I do see is things that don't strike me as controversial for code, like vents. It wasn't mentioned here in the presentation, but we all know that it's really important. I don't know about hidden flashing, if you have any leeway with interpretation of the code for things that are below visibility, gaps and rot. So those are the things where I'm thinking we can get the best bang for our buck, and I'd hate to see us set another season aside to planning and not inform the downtown owners of things they can do that take away like 50% of their amber risk potentially. There's no number, that's not a science number, but these are the things that CAL FIRE's finally come to, and they haven't publicized it well, as the low-cost retrofit program. And a lot of those things, in my perception, don't change the aesthetic of the building. I have no idea how it actually works.
And I will add, we're already working on a lot of those lower hanging fruit items, and there's mechanisms already in place that, one, we're trying to educate them, and two, we're also trying to support with funding. So in the near future, there will be something in front of the council that outlines a little bit more specifically of somebody can basically sign away, we want our vents replaced and we want door sweeps done, very low, non-aesthetically, fronting objectives pretty soon. And that will be, really targeting what you're speaking of. Voids,
Yeah, because
and the historic.
that's the educational low-hanging fruit piece, which needs to happen by Evans folks no matter what. And it's not the same, I think, as design standards and code, I think. Gary?
Yeah, I think for my own sake, whatever, being a little bit of a Luddite here, I think it would be great for me to understand, what we're doing for process, right? And again, we're not there yet, but I'm just saying as an outcome sometime soonish, right? Define some kind of process. A crappy plan is better than no plan, right? That's my general thing. It seems like I need more time with this Headwaters info to think about, and then, right, pulling that up against current both code and design guidelines, right? And see again, what's massaged, and then however we want to structure the grouping or the clustering or the conversation. Seems like from there, we make recommended changes, right, to code and design guidelines, and then that comes, right, then we throw that in the middle and we just talk about it and see what's doable and get everyone's input on it. That's at least a starting point in my mind.
I don't disagree with that at all. I think, and I'm getting pinged by Pascal, But it's like, we should go to the council, say this is a priority, and we need a committee to take this on, and we need the resources to do it. And I think we can do that. That we could do, but it still doesn't give me a structure or a committee to develop that. And
So I think you suggested it, and I think I'm seeing some consensus here, a joint committee with, you know,
I think,
representative from both, you know, there's expertise on both sides that are important here.
yeah.
In which, right, the council would have to create a separate
Right.
committee.
I see.
Yeah.
That can be an item where you list it as a priority.
Yeah, and then,
Go from there.
I don't know, offline, we can, I'm not gonna make anybody volunteer now unless you really wanna raise your hand and say, oh, I wanna do it.
And can I ping Ryan real quick and the CPAW folks?
Yeah.
From what we're saying here, does that sound like something you all are, one, willing to help with and assist with? You can say no, but then two, is that kind of the general process you would imagine?
Yeah, we're here for however you need us for however long. We'd love to be a part of it in any way that suits you. And I think that process, it's really how you all think it's best to tackle it. From our perspective, what's most effective is to look at the aspects of your code or guidelines that have the most, regulatory impact on historic buildings. I am familiar with your design guidelines. I'm not as familiar with your code. So I think we'd have to familiarize ourselves with that as well and look at both and see the impact that they have. So that hopefully answers your question
Yes.
in part.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so short of finding members, we have a path forward. And we can get that on the council agenda, but we will need, folks that want to participate in doing it. And, it can be run a lot of different ways, but 3 to 5 people, and then do we need to, as Lori suggested, look into the community for other resources to figure out how to do this, or start and then bring it back to the community and get reaction. So there's a lot of ways forward.
I think we probably start internally and decide what we need
Okay.
after that.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay. Okay.
Well, yeah, there's no vote on this item. If anyone has any parting words, please share them, but we will break for 5 minutes. The planning commission is free to leave. Our live stream is free to end, and
Yeah, let me just make closing comments I got to make.
closing comments, sorry.
Yeah, great, thank you. I think the important thing and what was important to come out of this meeting was the understanding of the gravity and the necessity. And I think we're all there. And we've talked about it a lot over on this side of the house, because that's what we do, we just look at those threats. And I will never forget that the picture I showed of walking through downtown with the UC Davis people, and it's like, that one's gonna burn, that one's gonna burn, that one's gonna burn. And it started there. And that was like 2.5 years ago. And then you start looking and you start thinking about it and you start learning. But we've all done a lot of learning. As I said in my final quote, it's about the learning. It's about what we have to learn together about how to proceed with this. But thank you for your thoughtfulness and your participation. Thank you all for being planning commissioners. It's like the one time I would never do that. But thank you all. It's been great to have you here, and I think let's do it again soon.
I think, Evan, we're going to jump off now if that's okay. We're happy to stick around if you want us to, but before I do, I also want to commend you all. This is an incredibly difficult topic. There's a reason why a lot of communities haven't tackled it, and yet it's overlooked for a reason. It's hard, and I have learned so much by reading your design guidelines and watching your work from afar, and I look forward to the opportunity to learn more.
Thank you for partnering with us. It's really, to know that we have your support and your knowledge in doing this work will really allow us to advance.
Well, thanks so much, everyone, for having us join you virtually, and we look forward to next steps.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
On the other hand, there's nothing more historic than Nevada City burning down.
Well, 4 times, 3 times, 4 times?
And yet, let's not, shall we?
But when I heard, when somebody said, well, people use shutters, and we're going, yeah, we know that. Just look anywhere.
Passive systems.
But there's a serious aspect to that. That is truly something we should make public in all of our things, right? The city has historically burned down.
People have been here before. We've dealt with the urban fire, but it was from candles.
Yeah.
And now we see all the brick
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's brick because of that. And,
Exactly.
those metal.
All right.
Thank you, folks.
Councilmember Peterson, can I just have you adjourn the planning commission
Yeah,
meeting?
yeah, yeah, sure,
and then
okay.
we'll continue on.
Thank you.
Adjourn the planning commission meeting, and then we'll just do our thing and hang out, because we're.